Montana Territory, 1883. A hard wind came howling down from the Bitterroot Mountains the morning Kenzie Hale buried her husband. The sky was clear, blue as polished glass, but the wind cut through the trees like a warning. Pine branches whispered above the gravesite where the preacher's voice barely carried. Kenzie stood with her black shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, her face pale but dry. There were no tears left, not after the last year. Not after watching her husband waste away from the fever and then digging the grave herself when no one else would. Her two boys, Benjamin and Beau, stood close at her sides. Benjamin was 6, Beau only 4. They clung to her skirt, too young to understand why their father's body lay beneath the earth, why their mother hadn't spoken a word since dawn. People left quick after the preacher said the last amen. No one offered help. No one had in months. By sundown, Kenzie was alone again. The boys had fallen asleep in the loft above the barn, wrapped in old quilts. She sat on the porch steps, shotgun across her lap, watching the last light sink behind the ridge. Her land stretched wide and empty. Half the fencing was down. The barn roof leaked when it rained. Her pantry was nearly bare. She knew what came next. Men sniffing around, offering help with their hands and their eyes both greedy. Someone would try to tell her to sell off the land, marry quick, leave. But she was not leaving. This land was the last thing she had left from her father, and she'd be damned if she let anyone take it. The next morning, a horse came down the ridge. Kenzie stepped off the porch before the rider reached the gate. She had the shotgun in her arms, not raised, but not lowered either. The rider slowed as he approached. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, with a trail coat dusted in road dirt and a wide-brimmed hat shading his face. He looked young, but not boyish, maybe in his late 20s, with a kind of quiet steadiness in the way he moved, like he knew how to handle both a horse and trouble. "Morning, madam," he said, voice low and even. "Name's Silas Monroe. I heard about your husband. I'm real sorry." Kenzie didn't answer. He nodded once, like he'd expected that. "I worked cattle over near the Clearwater River, riding back through when I heard you might need a hand." "I do not," she said. Silas looked past her at the broken fence, the empty pasture, the barn with its sagging door. "Looks like a place that could use 2 hands, maybe 4. Mine are free." "I pay no one," Kenzie said, "and I do not feed strangers." "I do not need pay," he said simply, "and I brought my own jerky." She stared at him for a long time. He didn't fidget. Just waited, reins loose in his hands, horse still beneath him like it trusted him fully. Then one of the boys called from inside the house. "Mama," Kenzie's jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the door. Silas didn't move. "That your boy?" Kenzie lowered the shotgun. "2 of them." "They are all I got," he nodded. "I understand." She didn't say yes, but she turned and walked back toward the porch. "If you are staying, there is a broken fence out east. Watch for snakes." Silas dismounted. "Yes, ma'am." He started work that day. Quiet, steady work. No questions. No wandering eyes. He mended the fence, then checked the roof. That night he slept in the barn. By the end of the week, the boys had taken to him. Beau followed him like a shadow, asking questions about horses and saddles. Benjamin stayed quieter but watched him with something like hope behind his eyes. Kenzie tried not to watch him at all, but she did. She watched the way he lifted Beau up to check the barn rafters, the way he always made sure the boys ate first, the way he never pushed, never asked what happened to her husband, or why she looked at everyone like she expected them to betray her. Late one evening, Kenzie found him sitting out by the corral watching the stars. "You should not be here," she said. He looked up. "You mean out here or on your land?" "Both." He nodded again, slow. "I figured." She crossed her arms. "I know how this goes. You stay long enough, start thinking you can fix things. "You cannot. This land breaks everyone. My husband died trying. You will too." Silas leaned forward, arms resting on his knees. Maybe I will." "Then why stay?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because I think you are worth staying for." She laughed, short and bitter. "You will regret it." His answer came without pause. "Then let me regret it every day." Kenzie stared at him, the wind cutting through the grass between them. "You do not know me," she said. "I know enough," he said. "I see the way you carry those boys, the way you never sit down unless they are sleeping, the way you work harder than any man I have met." "That kind of knowing does not last," she said. "Maybe not," he said. "But I am still here." She walked away. Her hands shook later when she was washing up at the basin, not from fear, from something else. From the way his voice sounded when he said, "I am still here." The days stretched on. Silas kept working. He never asked for more than she offered. But he was always there in the field, in the barn, at the table with the boys. And slowly, something in her began to thaw. One evening, she found Beau asleep in his arms, curled against his chest like he had done it 100 times before. Silas looked up, embarrassed. "I tried to put him down, but he would not let go." Kenzie just nodded. "He misses his father." "I am not trying to replace him." "I know," she said, but still she watched the way Silas held him. Gentle, solid, like he would never drop him. That night after she put the boys to bed, she walked to the barn. Silas was brushing down his horse. He turned when she stepped in. "I buried my husband with my own hands," she said. "I dug the grave. I lowered the body. I said the prayers." Silas set the brush down. "I know. I have not touched another soul since. I do not trust easily." "I am not asking for trust," he said. "I am asking for time." She stepped closer. "You meant what you said about regretting it," he nodded. "I will regret not trying a hell of a lot more." Kenzie stared up at him. The lantern light caught in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time she let herself breathe. "Then stay," she said. "Just stay." He reached out gently. His hand brushed her shoulder and her breath caught, but she did not pull away. "I am not going anywhere," he said. And for the first time since the funeral, Kenzie Hale closed her eyes and let someone hold her. The first frost came early that year. It crept in overnight, silvering the grass and curling the last of the squash vines by morning. The boys pressed their noses to the windowpane while Kenzie ladled cornmeal mush into tin bowls, steam rising in soft threads. Silas had already gone out at first light, taking the axe to the cottonwood by the creek that had dropped a limb in the last storm. Kenzie watched him from the kitchen doorway, one shoulder leaned against the frame. He worked without rush, each swing precise, his breath visible in the cold. Beau tugged at her skirt. "Can we take him bread?" She handed him a folded cloth with a thick slice wrapped inside. "Go on. Don't trip on the root by the gate." The morning passed with the weight of coming winter pressing down on them. Kenzie kept to the pantry, sorting what jars she had left: half a row of pickled carrots, 2 jars of apple preserves. She'd need to stretch the flour, maybe barter with the McClary widow for more. The thought tightened her jaw. By midday, the boys were helping Silas haul wood to the shed. She heard their laughter before she saw them: Benjamin riding atop the sled while Beau ran beside, waving a stick like a cavalry saber. Silas walked behind, a rope looped around one shoulder, pulling the load steady up the slope. That evening, after supper, she stitched by lamplight while Silas sat across from her, whittling something in his lap. The boys had gone to sleep early, worn out from the cold. A quiet settled between them that wasn't uncomfortable. It stretched like a blanket, warm and thick. He held up the small carving. "For Beau," he said. "Horse or close enough." She set her needle aside and took it. "He'll love it. Benjamin's next. Maybe a fox. I saw him watching one near the fence line the other day." She turned the carving over in her hand. "They've taken to you. They're good boys." She didn't speak for a moment, then said, "They were scared of every man who came by after." "I'm not every man." She raised her eyes. "No, you're not." She hesitated, then added, "I keep waiting for you to ask something of me." "I won't." "Why?" He set the knife down carefully. "Because I don't want anything you're not ready to give." She looked at the worn edge of the table, running her thumb along a groove she hadn't noticed before. "I don't know what ready looks like anymore. Maybe it doesn't look like anything. Maybe it just feels like breathing easier." She looked up at him, and for the first time in a long while she could meet a man's eyes without bracing for what came next. 2 days later, she saddled the mule and rode out to the ridge alone. The boys were with Silas, helping him check the traps he'd set for rabbit. She hadn't gone up to the ridge since spring, not since before. The wind was sharper up there, but the view stretched clear to the river bend. She dismounted and sat on the rock her father had favored, the one flat enough for two. She took the letter from her coat pocket, the one she'd written months ago but never sent. It was addressed to her sister in Kansas, the last of her kin, but the words inside didn't ask for money or rescue. Just a line or two about the boys and how the land still breathed beneath her boots. She didn't open it. She burned it instead, the flame catching fast in the dry air, curling the paper into ash. Then she stood and turned back toward home. Silas was waiting by the barn when she returned. Bo was asleep against his chest again, and Benjamin sat nearby, sharpening a stick with a stone. Kenzie dismounted and took the steps up the porch slowly. "Everything all right?" Silas asked. She nodded. "I just needed to remember what the land looked like from up high." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You want to sit with me a while?" She walked down the steps and sat beside him on the edge of the trough. Bo stirred but didn't wake. "I buried a letter today." Silas glanced at her. "Was it goodbye?" It was a tether. She folded her hands in her lap. "But it's not mine anymore." He didn't ask what she meant, just shifted slightly so his shoulder brushed hers. "I've been thinking," he said after a while. "There's a stream down past the old cottonwoods. If we dammed part of it, we could run a sluice to the garden. Might keep things from burning up next summer." She nodded. "I'd like that." He looked down at Bo's small fingers curled in sleep. "I don't want to leave come spring." "You don't have to." His eyes met hers, steady and clear. "You sure?" She reached over and took his hand, rough and warm beneath hers. "I am." The stars came out one by one, and the cold deepened around them, but Kenzie wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Not with Silas seated at her side, the boy sleeping safe in his arms, and the land stretching wide and quiet beneath their feet. The snow came slow that winter, not in heavy storms but steady, quiet falls that softened the world inch by inch. By late December, the pasture held a white hush, and the trees bowed gently under frost. Smoke curled from the chimney in a thin, straight line, and the cabin stayed warm from the wood Silas split each morning before light. Kenzie had taken to waking earlier. Not out of worry, but because she liked the sound of boots crossing the porch, the rhythm of kind work being done before the sun touched the fields. She'd wrap her shawl around her shoulders and sit a moment by the stove, listening to the wind thread through the eaves and the slow stirring of her boys above. One morning, as she kneaded dough at the table, Silas pushed through the door with his collar dusted in snow. "Something's come down off the ridge," he said, brushing his coat clean. "Tracks too wide for deer. Might be elk or something spooked in." Kenzie rinsed her hands and dried them on her apron. "We could use the meat." "I'll take Benjamin at first light. He's old enough to carry a rifle. If we find it, he'll be the one to take the shot." Her hands stilled at that. "He's never shot anything larger than a hare. He's steady. I've seen it." She met his eyes. "Don't let him feel rushed." "I won't." She watched him peel his gloves and lay them by the stove. There was a steadiness in the way he moved now that hadn't been there at first. A kind of rootedness, like he'd stopped thinking of this place as borrowed ground. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed and the lantern burned low, Kenzie sat sewing a patch on Beau's worn trousers. Silas stood by the window, arms folded, watching the snow drift. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked without looking up. "Used to," he said, "before I came here." "What changed?" He turned to face her. "I didn't know a place could feel like it was waiting for you." She set the needle aside. "You still haven't asked me for anything, not even a promise." "I was waiting for you to want to give one." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed loosely. "You're not curious where I came from before this land. I figure if it mattered, you'd tell me." "It doesn't anymore," she said. "But I used to think if I ever let someone in again, they'd see it all, the grief, the sharp edges, and run." "I saw it," he said. "And I stayed." She stood slowly and crossed the room. He didn't reach for her, just waited. She touched his collar, brushing away a fleck of snow that had melted and dried into salt. "I told you once you'd regret loving me. I remember." "You still want to," he nodded, voice quiet. "Then let me regret it every day." Her fingers curled at his shirt front, and something eased inside her, like a knot worked loose by time and patience. She laid her head against his chest, and he held her like he knew the shape of every wound she carried. They stood like that a long while, until the wind died down and the fire in the stove hissed low. In the morning, Benjamin rose early, careful not to wake his brother. Silas handed him the smaller rifle from the rack and a strip of dried meat for the trail. Kenzie packed them both bread and wrapped it in linen. "Stay to the south bend," she said. "The ice is thinner near the marsh." Benjamin nodded, eyes bright with something between pride and nerves. Silas gave her a look before they left, quiet reassurance. Nothing more, and then they were gone, boot prints fading into the snow. She and Beau spent the morning mending fence near the barn, tying new wire where the old had sagged. By mid-afternoon, she spotted them returning, a shape slung over Silas's shoulder and Benjamin walking taller than he had the day before. "It was a clean shot," Silas said once they were inside, laying the elk quarter on the chopping block. He waited. "Didn't rush." Kenzie placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "You did good." Benjamin looked up at her, his face lit with something new, something earned. That night they cooked what they could and salted the rest. Silas and the boys sang a half-remembered trail song while they worked, Beau slapping the table in rhythm. Kenzie sat by the fire, watching the three of them, a quiet warmth blooming in her chest. After the boys were asleep, Silas joined her outside on the porch. The snow had stopped and the sky stretched wide with stars. Breath curled in the air between them, but neither felt the cold. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low. "When spring comes, I could build a new coop. Chickens would help," she nodded. "And a root cellar. The ground's dry enough beneath the hill." He leaned against the post beside her. "You ever think you'd want to marry again?" She didn't answer at first, just looked out at the dark pasture, the faint shape of the barn beyond. "I don't want what I had before," she said. "I want something made different, built slow, with eyes open." "I'd like that," he said. She turned to him. "Then ask." He stepped closer, brushing his fingers along her sleeve. "Kenzie Hale, will you let me build a life with you?" She took his hand. "Yes." No grand declarations followed. Just the creak of the porch boards beneath them, the hush of snow settling on a roof above a warm, lived-in home, and two people who had chosen each other with full hearts and open eyes. By late January, the creek behind the barn froze clean through, and the hens stopped laying altogether. The mornings came dim and slow, and the wind had a deeper voice, lower, more deliberate. Kenzie wrapped the boys in wool before they stepped outside, and Beau's mittens stayed tied at the wrists so he wouldn't lose them in the snowdrifts. Silas helped her lift the stove from the summer kitchen into the cabin proper. It took most of the day and a length of rope to ease it over the porch step, but by nightfall, it was burning steady in the corner, and the room held a deeper warmth. "I've never had a winter like this," he said as he straightened from the hearth, brushing ash from his shirt front. Kenzie was mending a tear in one of Beau's socks by lantern light. "Too cold where you're from, too lonely," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. "I used to travel south when the cold came. Followed the herds, sometimes the rail camps, but it always felt like waiting out the season, not living through it." She passed the needle through the heel. "And now, feels like I'm part of the rhythm here. Like I'm not just passing through." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters once, then quieted. Beau had fallen asleep curled beside the stove, his mouth open just enough to whistle when he breathed. Kenzie glanced toward the boy, then turned slightly toward Silas. "You've been teaching Benjamin how to sharpen his own blades?" he asked, Silas said. "Didn't seem right not to." "He trusts you," she said. "He doesn't do that easy." Silas didn't look away from the fire. "I don't take that lightly." She picked up the other sock and worked the needle through. "He's more like me than he is his father." "I've noticed," Silas said, soft. "He watches before he acts, measures twice." She paused, fingers still. "You think that's a good thing?" "I think it means he won't waste time on the wrong people." Kenzie's eyes caught his. The quiet between them stretched, not heavy, just full. "Silas," she said, voice even, "I don't know what comes next. I don't either. But I want you here when it does." His hand met hers, rough skin brushing her knuckles. "Then I'm here." The next morning, Benjamin helped Silas repair the sled runners, and Beau stayed inside with Kenzie, sorting dried herbs from the cupboard. She showed him how to tell wormwood from sagebrush by scent alone, and he clapped when he got it right. Later, while the boys napped, Silas returned from the barn with a bundle wrapped in old canvas. "I've been working on something," he said, laying it gently on the table. "Meant it for spring, but figured maybe now's better." Kenzie unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a wooden cradle, smooth and sturdy, the joints clean. Simple but made with care. She touched the edge with her fingers. "Why would you make this?" "Because someday," he said, quiet, "you might want another." She looked up, her face unreadable. "I'm not asking," he added. "Just offering." She stood still for a moment, then reached out and ran her hand along the curved headboard. "You made this with your own hands." "I had some help from the old draw knife in the shed." Her throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "It's beautiful." Silas nodded once, then stepped back. "I'll put it in the loft for now. No need to rush anything." She didn't stop him. But that night, after the boys were abed and the fire burned low, she climbed the ladder and looked at it again, ran her hand along the rail, then sat beside it in the dark. "I never thought I'd be allowed to want more," she whispered. From below, she heard Silas stoke the fire, the soft clink of iron on iron. And she knew without looking that he was waiting for her to come down, not to ask, not to press, but to be there when she did. By February, the hens began laying again, just 2 eggs every other morning, but enough. The sky held light a little longer each day, and the boys played farther from the porch, their laughter drifting as they chased each other along the frozen fence line. One evening, Kenzie found Silas in the barn, oiling the harness straps. She leaned against the post, arms crossed. "You ever wonder what we'd be if I hadn't stopped you at the gate that first day?" He glanced up. "I'd have wandered on, missed this whole life. And if I hadn't told you, you'd regret it." He stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I never would have known how lucky I was to regret it every day." Kenzie stepped forward, reached up and touched his jaw. "I don't regret it anymore." He leaned into her hand just enough. "Neither do I." She kissed him then, slow and certain, and the cold outside seemed far away. That night, she lit the lamp early, set 4 places at the table, and told the boys they'd be sleeping in the loft while the grown-ups stayed below. Bo asked why, and Benjamin rolled his eyes but didn't argue. When the light was out and the wind moved soft over the roof, Kenzie lay beside Sela's, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist. "Spring's coming," she said. "It is. We'll need more seed this year. More hands, too. I'm yours for as long as you'll have me." "Good," she said, her voice like the hush of snow melting into earth. "Because I'm done waiting for things to break. I want to build." And in the dark, he kissed her hair and held her closer, and neither of them feared the morning. By the first thaw, the narrow path behind the barn turned to mud, and the roof let down its last sheets of ice with heavy, sudden drops. Kenzie stood at the edge of the garden plot in a worn shawl, watching the ground soften. The old fence posts leaned a little more than they had in autumn, and the soil held deep pockets where frost had lifted it. She stepped carefully between rows, imagining what might take root this year. Carrots, maybe. Beans if the water held. She knelt and pressed her palm to the earth. It was still cold, but no longer lifeless. Behind her, Sela's called the boys to fetch the last of the logs from the pile. Benjamin's voice answered first, then Bo's, the 2 of them running in wide arcs around the chicken coop, boots splashing in the slush. Sela's joined her in the garden without speaking, crouched beside her and ran his fingers through the dirt. A crow passed overhead, its shadow sweeping long across the field. "We'll need to dig deeper rows this year," she said. "The slopes dropped." "I'll set the plow blade lower," he said. "Won't take more than an afternoon." She looked at him sideways. "You always say that." He grinned, but didn't argue. That night, while the boys slept curled together in the loft, Kenzie stitched a new muslin curtain for the front window, her fingers moving slow but sure through the fabric. Sela sat nearby, sharpening a drawknife with a strip of stone, the rasping sound steady under the quiet. "When this place was my father's," she said, "he kept a map nailed behind the door. He'd mark every planting, every flood, every fire. Said the land remembers if you let it." Sela's leaned back. "You still have it. Lost it when the roof caved in that spring Bo was born." She folded the cloth neatly in her lap. "But I remember the marks, more or less." Sela stood, crossed to the cabinet, and pulled out a scrap of canvas. "We could make a new one, mark it proper this time." Together. Kenzie held his gaze a moment, then nodded. "All right." The days lengthened. The creek swelled and ran loud. They tapped the last of the sugar sap from the cottonwoods and boiled it down in a black kettle behind the house. Bo got his fingers sticky trying to sneak a taste, and Benjamin spent 3 evenings building a lean-to from broken fence rails, determined to sleep outside once the frost lifted for good. One morning, Sela's brought down a bundle from the loft and laid it on the table. The cradle, wrapped in its canvas again, but this time sanded smoother, a thin coat of oil rubbed into the wood. Kenzie ran her hand along the rail, then looked up at him. "I wasn't sure when to ask," he said, "but I'd like us to try." "If you want." She stood quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable, then rested her hand over his. "I do." They married in April under the cottonwoods, with the boys standing beside them and the wind carrying the scent of thawed loam and pine. The preacher came up from town, a quiet man with a rough beard and a soft voice, and Kenzie wore a blue dress that had once belonged to her mother, the hem refitted by hand. Sela's had shaved that morning, the fresh line of his jaw catching the early light. When he took her hand, his thumb brushed the scar on her knuckle, the one she'd gotten splitting wood the winter her husband died. He kissed it before he spoke his vows. There were no guests beyond the preacher and the boys, and that suited them fine. By midsummer, the garden stood tall and green, beans climbing their stakes, squash curling wide under thick leaves. The coop had a fresh coat of lime wash, and the new root cellar held shelves already half filled with early potatoes and jars of rhubarb. One afternoon, Kenzie stood at the edge of the field watching her sons race toward the creek. Silas came up behind her, his hands dusty from the far post he'd been setting. "Benjamin says he wants to learn to read the weather," he said. "Says the sky's got patterns." She smiled. "He watches the clouds more than he used to." Silas placed a hand on her back, warm through the fabric. "You look well." She turned to face him fully. "I feel it." They walked down toward the creek together. The boys had stripped off their boots and were wading knee-deep in the water, Bo shrieking with laughter as Benjamin splashed him. Kenzie sat on the bank, her skirts fanned out on the grass, and Silas dropped beside her, knees drawn up, elbows resting there. "It's a good life," he said. "It is." He looked over, his face open and quiet. "Are you happy, Kenzie?" She didn't answer right away. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, slow and sure. "I am," she said. "And I didn't think I ever would be again." They sat a while longer, the sun warm on their backs, the boys' laughter weaving through the trees. The world didn't ask much that day, and they gave it their stillness in return. In September, Kenzie gave birth to a daughter. They named her Clara, after the white flowers that grew wild along the south ridge. The birth was slow, but steady, and Silas stayed by her side through every hour, his hand never leaving hers. When the baby's first cry filled the room, Kenzie wept for the first time in a long while, not from pain, but from the fullness of her heart. Bo called Clara his baby and refused to let her out of his sight. Benjamin carved her a rattle from a piece of pine and polished it until it shone pale gold in the light. That winter they all slept under one roof, the cradle nestled close to the hearth, the walls thick with warmth, and the scent of pine, resin, and bread. Kenzie would watch Silas hold Clara in the evenings, his large hand cradling her small head, his voice low as he hummed some tune she did not know but had come to love. And in the quiet moments when the world outside lay frozen and still, Kenzie would look at the life they had built and feel only peace. She no longer feared the wind or the silence. She no longer waited for things to fall apart. She had chosen and been chosen in return, and that was enough. More than enough, always.